My wife abandoned me and left the gala with another man through the back door. So I ran toward them, and when she saw me, she simply looked away, as if she had already made her choice. I stopped right there, took a deep breath, and let her go. That night, our story ended without screams, but with the silent pain of betrayal. She followed her impulse and soon discovered it was just that, an impulse. The other man never wanted more than a fling, and she was left alone, amidst memories and regret. I rebuilt myself in silence, and when I least expected it, I found a new love with eyes that truly saw me, someone who chooses to be with me every day. Some time later, my ex came to me, asking for forgiveness. I listened respectfully, offered the forgiveness that frees, but made it clear, what we were is in the past. We each moved on, and the pain gave way to peace. But that's what everyone saw. What stayed with me was the bitter taste of something that didn't end in a fight, but stayed alive inside me for months. I didn't sleep well for weeks. I found myself reliving that night like someone watching their own life fall apart in slow motion, unable to stop the scene. I saw her walk in wearing that red dress that reminded me of our first wedding anniversary, the smile she gave me as she adjusted the strap on her shoulder, whispering that she felt beautiful, and she did. I saw her cross the room, greet our friends, smile politely, shake my hand, and say she needed to go to the bathroom, and when I looked again, she was disappearing around the back, arm in arm with a man who wasn't me, who had never been part of our history, who stole what was mine without even asking permission. The difference is, she went with him. She chose. I followed, my heart racing, not out of jealousy, but out of fear. Fear of being right. Fear of seeing with my own eyes that the distance between us, silently growing for months, had become an unbridgeable chasm. When I caught up with them in the parking lot, she looked at me for half a second, and it was as if all the years together, all the laughter, the promises, the lazy Sundays, and the plans made in the dim light, had evaporated from that empty gaze. She said nothing. She just turned her face away as if she owed nothing, as if she'd already left, as if she'd never come back. I stood there, frozen, as the car engine started and they disappeared into the night like a nightmare we can't wake from. And what killed me wasn't the scene, it was her silence. The absence of an explanation. Not even a goodbye. That night, I didn't cry. I went to the nearest bar, ordered a glass of whiskey, then 2 more, and stared at my reflection in the mirror until I forgot what hurt. The pain wasn't just the betrayal. It was knowing I would have done everything differently. I would have tried again, I would have walked back from so many arguments, I would have listened more, demanded less, touched her face more before bed. The pain was knowing she could have tried too. But she didn't. She chose to give up on us. The following days were a mixture of anger and guilt. I tried to understand what was missing, where I had failed to be enough. I scoured every detail of our routine, searching for signs I might have missed. I began to remember glances that lingered too long, laughter on the phone, meetings that stretched beyond their allotted time, the coldness of hugs, the sudden disappearance of loving messages. It all began to make sense too late. I wanted to forget, but I clung to the memory of what we were. And even though I knew she was no longer there, I still heard her footsteps through the empty house, still left space in the closet, still glanced at the side of the bed as if waiting for an impossible return. Months later, when the pain began to subside and the silence stopped hurting so much, I began to rebuild myself. Silently. I didn't post indirect messages, I didn't share my sorrows. I was alone. I started running in the park at dawn, I went back to reading books that made me forget reality, and one day, sitting alone in a coffee shop, I felt someone really look at me. Not with pity, nor with fleeting desire. A clean look. As if seeing me whole, despite the scars. Little by little, unhurriedly, that look became conversation, then companionship, then home. It wasn't like before. It was better. Because now it was light. And, above all, it was a choice. Every day. It was then, at the exact moment my life was beginning to smile again, that she reappeared. Not arrogantly. But with a timid plea, like someone holding pain between their fingers. She told me she'd made a mistake, that it was impulse, that the other man didn't want anything after the first night, that she tried to find him, but he already had another woman, who was used, and then discarded. And, with tears in her eyes, she said she now knew the value of what she'd lost. That I was home. That I was the man. That I was the love she couldn't hold on to. I listened to her. Not out of hope. But out of respect. The same respect she didn't show me when she chose to leave without looking back. And calmly, I said I forgave her. I truly did. Because forgiving means letting go of a burden that no longer serves. But I also made it clear, what we were is in the past. Love doesn't last alone. Love needs to be sustained by two. And now, I was with someone who chose me. Who didn't hesitate. Who wouldn't leave me in a dance parking lot as a second option. The pain turned to peace. And peace, sometimes, is loving someone new without forgetting who you were. A few years passed. We never exchanged messages again. No birthday greetings, no life updates. But she always knew where to find me. And one day, during a social event at a hotel in the city, she saw me in the distance. She was alone. I was holding the hand of my now wife. We were laughing at something silly. And she looked at me. For a few seconds, her eyes tried to smile, but couldn't. She knew. There, in that moment, I smiled like I'd never smiled with her. And that split second, was the worst punishment. Because it wasn't anger anymore. Nor sadness. It was absence. She passed me and tried to whisper my name, but I just smiled politely, never stopping walking. And in that lost look, I saw the recognition of the ultimate loss. Not of a man. But of love. The rare kind. The kind that forgives but never begins again. The kind she only appreciated after losing. The kind she would never find again. But what she doesn't know, what she never discovered, is what I did that morning, after I saw her leave. The decision I made. The last thing I left in her memory box before closing the lid forever. And that's the part of the story that nobody knows. Yet. Welcome to the channel. Here, we neither romanticize nor condone any kind of betrayal. All the stories you hear are fictional, but inspired by harsh realities, because the truth is simple, betrayal destroys. It hurts. And what is lost, often, is lost forever. Prepare yourself for an intense story, full of choices, consequences, and heartbreaking truths. Take a deep breath, the pain is about to begin. Her name was Emma, his was Daniel. And when they first looked at each other, there was no music, no clichés, but there was something silent, invisible, that seemed to align everything that was askew within each of them. She was fresh from a divorce, still trying to reorganize her soul after years in a lukewarm marriage, full of obligations and absence. He was a methodical man, possessed of an observant gaze, a smile that took its time to leave, but when it did, had the power of relief. They met during a legal conference in Chicago, in a cold hotel room where she was presenting a panel on ethics in the corporate environment. Daniel, seated in the last row, listened to every word with a rare attention for such a weary audience. She noticed. When their eyes met, it was brief but charged. And that night, as the city lost itself in its own routines, they went to dinner alone, by chance at the same restaurant, seated at different tables, until the chance turned into an invitation. The beginning was delicate. Emma, with her overly organized soul, was afraid of messing up what little she had rebuilt. Daniel, always so rational, found his own desire to share small things with someone strange. But life has a way of pushing two hearts in the same direction when there's something to be experienced. And they lived. Not hurriedly, but intensely. They began sharing Sundays in the park, breakfasts with burnt bread, half-watched movies. He started leaving a toothbrush at her house, and she decorated the corner of his living room sofa with a beige blanket. Before they knew it, they already had a home, even though neither of them had said it out loud. They didn't need to. 2 years later, they married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by people who believed that love could be a new beginning. Emma wore a light, almost ethereal dress, and Daniel wore his father's suit, tailored to his own body, as if carrying a piece of history within. It wasn't a spectacular wedding, but it was real. As real as the coldness in Daniel's hands as he placed the ring, as the tremor in Emma's voice as she promised to stay, even on the bad days. And they stayed. For a long time, they stayed. The house they chose together was modest but full of windows. She insisted on flowers on the porch, he tended the garden on Sundays. They worked hard to furnish everything calmly, choosing each object with stories and plans. She kept photo albums on low shelves, and he prided himself on organizing the couple's documents with almost military precision. Their daily lives were filled with a routine that only lovers know how to appreciate, arriving home to the same person, knowing that laughter would come with some silly memory, sharing silence without discomfort, sleeping with their feet touching under the blanket. It seemed like little to an outsider, but it was everything to them. Emma dedicated herself zealously to the law firm where she grew professionally. She had a firm voice in meetings, commanded respect with lucid arguments, and even when the environment was competitive, she remained firm, focused, and discreet. Daniel, on the other hand, preferred the calm of the public sector, where he worked as a legal advisor for a municipal department. He was proud of the stability it offered at home, even though he heard jokes about the bureaucratic routine. In truth, he enjoyed the predictability, and believed this constancy was a form of care. Emma sometimes missed something more vibrant, more challenging, but she never said it out loud. She kept it to herself, as if not wanting too much were a sign of maturity. At social events, they were seen as a solid, respected, and polite couple. They attended dinners, charity balls, and get-togethers with a certain distance, as if preserving what was theirs in a world apart. She, always elegant, discreet, with a presence that required no effort to be noticed. He, restrained, gentle, observant. People commented that he was a lucky man. And for a long time, he believed he was too. Not because she was perfect, but because she was his. Because they had chosen to walk together. Because there was love. Perhaps more his than hers, but it was still love. Little by little, things began to change. First, it was the routine. She started arriving later, saying her cases were demanding more hours. Then came the trips. One in particular, to a conference in New York, left Daniel restless for days. She returned different. Less present. More distracted. Sometimes, she seemed to chat with him like someone answering emails. The connection that had been silent before was now absent. But Daniel didn't question it. He had learned, throughout his life, that love requires patience. And maybe it was just a phase, just fatigue. He believed it. He needed to believe it. When he asked if everything was okay, she said yes. When he offered help, she smiled and said she didn't need it. When he tried to regain her composure, she walked away, claiming she was exhausted. But they still slept together. They still had dinner together. They still made plans for the next holiday. Something was broken, but something was still there. Or so Daniel wanted to believe. Inside, Emma was experiencing a conflict she couldn't name. She loved the idea of Daniel. She loved what he represented, security, affection, partnership. But something inside her was unsettling. A quiet voice telling her there was more. That maybe she was losing herself amidst the predictability. It wasn't his fault. It never was. It was an emptiness that even she couldn't explain. Maybe it was herself. Or maybe it was just a longing to feel something new. Something that would remind her she was alive. Even so, she continued. She made breakfast on Saturdays, arranged the tablecloths for guests, kept the picture frames lined up on the bookshelf. Daniel, for his part, continued his discreet dedication, trying not to pressure her. Sometimes he caught himself looking at her while he slept, trying to remember the exact moment he began to lose her, and not knowing if, in fact, he had already lost her. The love was still there, but shrouded in a veil of silence, of absence, of something no one could name. And it was in this context that they received an invitation to the gala ball of the Legal Foundation, of which Emma was one of the patrons. An elegant event, attended by the city's legal elite, featuring long gowns, impeccable suits, and speeches on justice and ethics. It was a night that often symbolized achievement and recognition. Daniel, as always, would be the silent escort, proud of the woman he saw excelling. She, with her hair tied back in a delicate bun, would choose a dress that discreetly emphasized her figure, impeccable makeup, and high heels. The arrival at the ballroom was as usual: flashes, greetings, glasses of sparkling wine. Smiles for acquaintances. Brief kisses on the cheek. But there was something different in the air. Something Daniel couldn't immediately identify. The way she distanced herself between conversations. The way she glanced around as if waiting for someone. A restless glint in her eyes. He didn't know it, but something about that night would mark the end of a cycle. There would be no fight. No explosion. But there would be a full stop. A full stop so subtle and yet so brutal that time itself would take a long time to erase it. And that night, as the music filled the room and the lights spun over the distracted heads of the guests, Daniel danced with Emma for the last time. His hands were firmly on her waist, his face pressed against hers, their familiar scent filling the air. He didn't know it. But it was the end. And even if she had known, she chose to say nothing. Because sometimes silence hurts more than the truth. The music still echoed lightly and elegantly in the hall, while glasses clinked and footsteps glided across the marble floor, creating an almost rehearsed choreography of distracted bodies and smiling faces. Emma was stunning in that dark blue dress that hugged her body with sobriety and elegance, her bare shoulders and partially exposed back creating an image Daniel couldn't stop admiring. Even though something inside him demanded silence. There was a subtle tension in the air, something unspoken, something he couldn't name, but which pulsed beneath his skin, as if his entire body knew what his mind still refused to accept. That night, the woman sleeping beside him had transformed into someone unrecognizable, and he couldn't understand how. She seemed restless, though she struggled to maintain her smile, though she greeted the guests with her usual cordiality, though she held his hand as if it were still his. And perhaps it was. But only until that moment. The warning came disguised as absence. A look that strayed whenever he sought her eyes, a hurried excuse when she pulled him toward the bar and said she needed to go to the bathroom. And when she disappeared through the side door of the lounge, Daniel felt his body freeze, but it took precious seconds to accept that this was really happening. He walked quickly through the hallways of the entrance hall, past the security guard, across the parking lot, his eyes searching every corner as if searching for his own heart fallen on the asphalt. And then he saw it. Emma was standing with her back to him, next to a black imported car, her arms crossed, waiting. The man who arrived was tall, well-dressed, with a smile too confident for the time and place. When she saw him, she smiled restrainedly, but filled with something Daniel had never seen on her face, anxiety. He stopped. A few meters away from them. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just waited. When Emma turned and saw him standing there, she said nothing. She didn't move her lips. She just looked away, as if she'd already made up her mind, as if she didn't need to explain. Daniel felt his throat tighten, as if he were trying to swallow all the years together at once. And then she got into the car with the other man. And the car drove off. There was no scene. There was no drama. There was only the emptiness of the asphalt, the silence of abandonment. And a man standing in the dark, trying to understand how love ends without noise. He didn't follow her. Not that night. He walked home with heavy steps, removed his tie as if ripping off a chain, and sat in the living room armchair, his eyes fixed on nothing. Everything hurt, but what hurt most was her silence. The way she simply erased him from the decision. As if he'd never been a part of it. In the days that followed, Emma didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't come home. Daniel respected her. Didn't seek her out. Didn't beg. He decided to suffer with dignity. He turned off his phone notifications, temporarily deleted his social media, and allowed himself to experience the pain without an audience. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning of the destruction. What Emma didn't yet know was how much she would lose. She tried to return weeks later. She arrived with a restrained look in her eyes, her voice lowered, and said she needed to gather some things. He opened the door and remained silent as she walked through the rooms where they had once shared their lives. He didn't ask for an explanation. She offered none. She simply thanked him and left. The emptiness that remained after her second departure was even more cruel. It was the echo of the certainty that it had all been real. And it was over. The months passed like someone dragging themselves through the shards. Daniel didn't tell anyone. He went back to work, re-established his routine, but he was never the same. Memories came without warning, her scent on some forgotten piece of clothing, a glass she used to use, the playlist still playing in the living room. Until, without seeking it, he met someone. And it wasn't an overwhelming love, nor a cinematic one. It was calm. True. It arrived as a cure, as light companionship. It was different. It was new. And for the first time, he allowed himself to look ahead. Then came the reunion. A social event, almost 2 years later. A charity dinner, like so many others they had attended. Daniel was different. His hair was shorter, his beard well-groomed, his gaze clearer. Beside him, a woman with kind eyes and a serene presence. Emma saw him from afar, between a glass of wine and a practiced laugh. She was alone. She wore a black dress, her hair loose, her eyes full of absence. As he passed her, he smiled politely, without stopping. She tried to hold his gaze, but he was already gone. It was there, in that moment, that she began to understand what she had done. In the following days, Emma reached out to a mutual friend. She asked for Daniel's number. She wanted to talk. He agreed to meet. They met at a discreet coffee shop. She arrived first. When he entered, she took a deep breath. She stood up with a half smile, and he returned it with a slight wave. They sat across from each other. She began by saying she had thought long and hard before asking him. That she hadn't expected anything, she just wanted to say she regretted it. That time had been cruel to her. That the man she'd gone out with that night disappeared days later. That there was never love. That it was just impulse. An escape. A wrong choice made at the worst possible moment. She said she felt stupid. That for a long time she believed he held her back, when in fact, he was what anchored her. That every relationship after that had been worse. That no smile had tasted the same. That no bed had felt like home. Daniel listened. Without interrupting. His heart heavy but firm. And when she finished, he said, in a calm voice, that he forgave her. Truly. But that he no longer loved her. That what they were was frozen in some beautiful corner of his memory, but now he was a different man. And that he was with someone who truly saw him. Who chose him every day. Emma tried to hide her pain. But eyes don't lie. She murmured that she understood, even though she didn't. She said she just wanted to see him happy. He thanked her. He paid the bill. And said goodbye with a kiss on her forehead. In that moment, Emma knew, she had lost. Not just a man. But the version of herself that was happy with him. A few months later, on a random night, while driving home alone, Emma turned on the radio. An old song was playing. The same one Daniel used to hum softly while washing the dishes. She smiled, but soon her eyes filled with tears. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and cried like she had never cried before. Not because of his absence, but because of her own absence. Because of the way everything inside her had shattered the very moment she chose to leave. And what she would never forget, what would burn inside her until the end of her days, was that moment at dinner. The image of him laughing with another woman, with a light, honest, carefree smile. A smile she'd never seen. A smile he'd never given her. And it was there, in that image, that Emma understood, the love she had been searching for all along, was the love she already had. But she chose to leave. She chose too late. Time doesn't erase everything, but it teaches us to live with what cannot be changed. The months that followed their reunion were silent for both of them. Daniel continued his life with a tranquility that came not from the absence of pain, but from the presence of peace. He had weathered an internal storm few had ever known, and now, even if some scars still appeared on rainy days, he knew who he was, what he wanted, and, most importantly, who chose to walk beside him. The woman he shared his life with no longer needed to fill the spaces left by another. She was new in everything, in the way she loved, in the way she cared, in the way she said, "I'm here," even in silence. By her side, Daniel didn't rebuild himself, he blossomed. And this was evident even in the smallest gestures. The mornings were lighter, laughter came easily, and the eyes that had previously been tired now shone with sincerity. There was no rush, no pressure. It was a simple but complete love. A love built with what's left of a broken heart, that refuses to die when there's still truth. Emma, on the other hand, was slowly losing herself. That encounter at the coffee shop had left deep scars. She left feeling like she'd said everything too late, and time, which had once seemed like her excuse, was now her punishment. The days grew long again, the nights even longer. She tried to fill the voids with work, with empty conversations, with fleeting loves, but nothing worked. Nothing had any meaning. Nothing was whole. Each new face she met only showed her more of what she had lost. The friends who once surrounded her drifted away, not out of resentment, but because she herself was no longer her companion. She carried on her shoulders the weight of a poor choice, of the silence that destroys more than a cry, of the lack of courage to fight for what was worthwhile. She spent hours looking at old photos, trying to understand when she became someone else. When she stopped recognizing herself. One random early morning, aimlessly scrolling through social media, she found a photo of Daniel with the woman who was now part of his life. They were on a road trip, sitting by a lake, laughing at something you couldn't hear but could feel. It was happiness. And there, in that moment, Emma realized a devastating truth: Daniel was a better man without her. He tried to pretend it didn't hurt. He tried to tell himself that it was part of life, that people lose themselves, that not everything is forever. But deep down, I knew that ending wasn't natural. It was provoked. Chosen. And worst of all, by her. They wrote a story together that could have been beautiful until the end, but it was interrupted by an impulse, by a momentary desire, by a search for something that already existed, but which she didn't have the patience to nourish. The lover, who had been her escape, vanished like smoke after the first night. He never answered any more messages, never called, never showed up again. It was a distraction that tasted like poison. And the poison remained. Emma didn't blame him. She had allowed it. The real mistake wasn't the physical betrayal. It was the emotional betrayal, silent, progressive. It was stopping the fight. It was abandoning home before opening the window to dialogue. Now, she wandered among the rubble of herself, trying to pick up the pieces she no longer knew where they were. Daniel, in turn, found stability not only in his new relationship, but also in himself. He began to appreciate the little things even more. He learned that love isn't suffocating, it's a daily choice. That true love never makes us doubt our worth. Over time, he remarried. A small ceremony, surrounded by truth, without empty promises, without appearances to uphold. The rings exchanged that day carried stories of overcoming and new beginnings. He knew nothing would be the same again, and that was good. Because now he was different, he was mature, he was aware. He looked at his new wife with the serenity of someone who knows how hard it is to lose someone you love. And this awareness made him love better. Years later, at a formal event, Emma and Daniel's paths crossed once again. She was alone, sitting at a table in the back, absently stirring a glass of wine. When she saw him enter, with the same steady gait as always, accompanied by the woman who was now his wife, she felt a new tightness in her chest. It wasn't longing anymore. It was acceptance. She watched them from afar, saw the subtle touch of their hands, the complicity in their eyes, and had no doubt, that was the end of the story. And it wasn't with her. On the way out, they met briefly. He greeted her with a polite, distant, yet kind smile. She returned it with a look that said it all: gratitude, guilt, peace. And for the first time, without needing to say anything, they both knew that chapter had, indeed, been closed. There was no more pain. There was no more resentment. Only the memory of something that could have been, but wasn't. And life went on. Differently for each of them. If you've made it this far, leave your thoughts on this story in the comments. What would you have done in each character's shoes? Do you think betrayal is forgivable? Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Every week, new stories of love, choices, and consequences that touch the soul. And remember, betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys trust, respect, history, and often, love itself. You don't just betray someone else. You betray yourself. On this channel, we don't condone any kind of betrayal. We tell these stories to show, without romanticizing, that every choice has a price. And that sometimes, regret arrives, when forgiveness no longer has a home.